Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. So before I begin, I would like to provide you with an insight to the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission itself. So the ACIC provides unique, actionable and insightful intelligence to combat the threats Australia faces from transnational serious and organised crime. So the purpose of the ACIC is to protect Australia from serious criminal threats by collecting, assessing and disseminating intelligence and policing information. So since 2016, one of the ACIC's responsibilities has been to coordinate the National Wastewater Drug Monitoring Program and related wastewater work. So next I'd like to give you a bit of background into relation to the ACIC's involvement into wastewater analysis. So we started out from modest beginnings in Queensland over a decade ago, and since that time we've played a series of roles, always in close partnership with the Australian universities who have the world-class expertise and experience to make our national program and our other wastewater work a reality. So the ACIC has driven and benefited from the results of the analysis of wastewater since 2013. So over this time, we've played many roles, including being a client and a source of funds, an advocate to government for wastewater-based epidemiology, a broker of introductions between the universities who do this work for us and new clients both domestically and overseas, a sounding board and occasionally a new idea source, a body which merges wastewater data with other data available to us, and a body which translates wastewater data into evidence-based policy advice and operational intelligence. So wastewater analysis has provided the ACIC and its broadening range of partners with endless opportunities to exercise our imagination and turn our ideas into reality. And I hope to give you some insights into that work today. So why have a national program? The ACIC needed to obtain a reliable estimate for the domestic demand for the major drugs, which could not be reliably deduced from survey data alone. This is because drug-using populations are a relatively small component of the broader population, so a combination of methods needs to be used to give decision makers the most granular picture possible. It's essential for meaningful harm conversations and risk assessments, and this is because harm is a function of the level of consumption. So wastewater measures actual drug consumption and demand, that is, the quantity consumed. It provides regular, flexible and timely data which lends itself to policy and operational decision making. There are no hidden populations and it's non-intrusive. It's a unique source of data, particularly in regional populations. And our program is highly regarded due to the frequency of sampling, the number of sites, its geographic reach, the extent of the population covered, and the expertise of the universities involved. So in 2015, the National Ice Action Task Force was established in Australia, which delivered a report and whose findings informed the National Ice Action Strategy, which continues to this day. So one of the key findings of the task force and the strategy was the need for additional data. And it's important to remember that no single data set has all the answers. So Australia's National Ice Task Force and National Ice Action Strategy had a focus on the need for holistic data solutions. So better data on illicit drug use will enable emerging trends to be identified and help governments to direct resources to priority areas. There should also be a regular reporting on progress to ensure all efforts remain on track. One of the other focuses was the need to monitor the effectiveness on demand, supply and harm reduction measures. So in short, best practice equals a mix of population surveys and other data, including wastewater. So you'll see a very close correlation between the objectives of the ACIC's wastewater work and the National Ice Action Strategy objectives. So our National Wastewater Drug Monitoring Program commenced in 2016. So we've partnered with the University of Queensland and the University of South Australia, now Adelaide University, to deliver it. We sample every 2 months in capital cities and every 4 months in regional sites, with every state and territory participating. We cover over 50 sites nationally, and this represents over 50% of the Australian population. So the program monitors 12 drugs, and these are methamphetamine, amphetamine, cocaine, 3,4-methylenedioxymethamphetamine or MDMA, 3,4-methylenedioxyamphetamine or MDA, cannabis, oxycodone, fentanyl, ketamine, heroin, alcohol and nicotine. So we have made some changes to the drugs monitored over the life of the program. We added heroin in 2017 and cannabis in 2018 and ketamine in 2020. And the reasons we've done this is twofold: that the universities had the confidence that they could be reliably detected and quantified in wastewater, and secondly, because we had concerns about consumption in the community. We also stopped monitoring for new psychoactive substances, and we had previously monitored 2 synthetic cannabinoids and 2 synthetic cathinones. And the reasons for this was that they were continuously detected below levels at which they could be reliably quantified, and these substances are comprehensively covered by a separate piece of wastewater work being conducted in Australia. So when our agency was advocating for a national wastewater program for Australia in 2015, following the issues we were having with methamphetamine, one of the points we made was that before you can fix a problem, you need to understand the dimension of the problem. So the level of demand for illicit drugs and other substances of concern is the best indicator of the extent of the problem because it measures consumption of a market, and wastewater analysis is the best means we know how to measure consumption. So once you understand the level of consumption of particular drugs, it's much easier to contextualise the extent of harms caused by that drug consumption, the relative level of threat posed by the substance, and where you need to focus various responses. So resource prioritisation is a key policy and operational decision, and wastewater analysis assists in providing the evidence base for these decisions, as you will see in the following slides. So we're able to meaningfully compare consumption of different drugs by comparing doses of the respective substances. So in addition to reporting the load consumed, the ACIC has always included, where possible, dose figures for the drugs monitored by the program. And this is really important when you're dealing with drugs such as fentanyl. So one of the most basic questions in a policy and operational sense is the level of consumption of the major drugs. So in this case, we have the levels displayed for cannabis, which is the green line, methamphetamine, the blue line, and then we have a somewhat confused mess, which is cocaine, heroin, MDMA, fentanyl, and oxycodone. So the figure confirms beyond any doubt that cannabis is the most consumed illicit drug in Australia, but for a series of other reasons, it's far from being the most harmful drug, which in our case is methamphetamine. So by removing cannabis from the figure, we get a more granular and meaningful indication of trends for the other drugs. We can now see that methamphetamine consumption is tangibly larger than the remaining illicit drugs. Cannabis aside, we can see Australia is a stimulant country with consumption of the other drugs fluctuating within a relatively narrow window. So in the year ending August 2024, Australians consumed an estimated 22.2 tonnes of methamphetamine, cocaine, MDMA and heroin. So this was 5.6 tonnes more than the previous year, which reflected a 34% increase. Methamphetamine increased 21%, cocaine increased 69%, MDMA 49% and heroin 14%. So what was the breakdown of the 22.2 tonnes, you say? In the year ending August 2024, Australians consumed an estimated 12.8 tonnes of methamphetamine, 6.8 tonnes of cocaine, 1.4 tonnes of MDMA and 1.1 tonnes of heroin. The 22.2 tonnes was the highest combined weight of the 4 drugs over the 8 years of the program, and it was also the highest consumption weights for methamphetamine, cocaine and heroin to date, with MDMA being the 3rd highest on record. So once we have the estimated consumption figures, we can use national median street prices for the respective drugs to provide insight to the estimated value of the drugs consumed. So in the year ending August 2024, the estimated street value of the 4 major drugs was $11.5 billion, of which methamphetamine accounted for $8.9 billion, or 78%. So another way of looking at this is to say that $11.5 billion was either poured back into further criminal offending or had to be laundered by the crime groups and their associates. So in the following slides, I'd like to give examples of how wastewater analysis is used in Australia to inform a range of important decisions. Wastewater assists in defining sources of threat and changing levels of consumption with greater precision in various parts of the country, and this can be done away from wastewater treatment plants. So we engage with partners to combine the data to understand demand and supply, and we achieve this through integrating the wastewater data with research and operational activity, merging the data with other law enforcement data, and integrating it with health and private sector data. So wastewater analysis gives us the ability to drill down into drug consumption across different sites in Australia. So in this case, we are looking at methamphetamine consumption at various capital city and regional sites in a single Australian state. As can be seen from the figure, consumption has varied across the sites over time. Of note is the high consumption at the regional site 76, which is denoted by the broken green line. This trend data can be used by law enforcement and health agencies to frame appropriate responses to local drug issues. It can also be used to justify the prioritisation of resources to particular areas. The regularity of wastewater analysis also permits us to analyse the impact on drug markets of major external events, such as in this case, restrictions in Australia during the COVID period. For example, when restrictions were their tightest, there was a consistent and significant decrease in methamphetamine consumption in all sites in this Australian state, followed by a short-term recovery, a subsequent decrease, and then a return to more normal consumption levels at the end of the COVID period. So these short-term fluctuations would have been much harder to detect and monitor without wastewater analysis. Another strategic application has been to overlay consumption data from the program with national seizure data to understand the impact of consumption of large seizures on what has happened with the, to understand, with national seizure data to understand the impact of consumption of large seizures. And this report is publicly available on the ACIC website. And this intervention could readily also be applied to health interventions or education interventions as well. So another unique benefit of wastewater analysis has been our ability to overlay seizure data with more granular wastewater data. And this has had multiple benefits, including our ability to determine the impact of a single seizure and the impact it has had in multiple locations, and the short and long-term effectiveness of law enforcement activity. So the example shown here shows a very large seizure in one Australian state several years ago, and the impact it had on consumption in several other Australian states. So analysis of this type in relation to drug markets has shown that law enforcement activity can reduce consumption for a period of time, but the organised crime groups always find a way to resupply the market. We're examining means of applying the same analysis to health sector responses. So the next couple of slides are more operational in nature. They relate to the analysis of methamphetamine and cocaine consumption in 4 separate but nearby locations in an Australian state after reports that various crime groups were active in the region. The methamphetamine slide results at the 4 separate regional cities, 3 of which had a lower socioeconomic demographic and 1 which had a more wealthy and tourist-focused demographic. Similar to many regional areas of Australia, meth consumption at all 4 locations is relatively high, but was lowest in the tourist location. There is also a relatively small variation over time in the level of consumption, with these locations all well supplied by serious and organised crime groups. The cocaine figure displays marked differences for the same 4 locations. First, the level of cocaine consumption is much lower than the methamphetamine consumption displayed in the previous slide, a trend that is common for many but not all Australian regional locations. In addition, only the more wealthy tourist location displayed the changes in consumption over time that is a common feature of the Australian cocaine market, which is exclusively supplied by imports. Consumption there is also tangibly higher than the other locations. In contrast, in the respective markets, provides food for thought. So the police agencies, when they're deciding where to allocate their resources and how to respond to the different drug markets. The analysis showcases the value for short-term intensive wastewater analysis to assist response agencies and to permit monitoring of multiple drug markets. So the ACIC has also funded bespoke wastewater analysis in a regional town, which also coincided with funded research by a university and police action. Survey questions were not confined to drug consumption and also included issues such as access to treatment and other health services. So the intent was to increase attention on rural and regional drug consumption and their harms, feed into policy practice to reduce drug-related harms, with the results finding a high level of congruence between the wastewater analysis and survey data for methamphetamine, cannabis and alcohol, which all had strong statistical significance. So this slide provides further detail as to the activity undertaken. The example relates to activity undertaken in 2021. It was a regional town in South Australia, and of note, the cross-sectional survey included information such as demographic, as I said, access to services, patterns of drug use both in the last 12 months and in lifetime, and also included information around price, purity and availability. And participants were also required to complete a 90-day daily diary in relation to their activities and drug use. So this slide highlights the results from the wastewater analysis and self-report survey, with the blue bar reflecting the wastewater analysis and the red line reflecting the survey results. It also highlights where the local arrests occurred, as well as local and national arrests. The second arrow was unplanned. For those who may be familiar, that related to Operation Ironside, which was a long-term covert investigation into transnational serious and organised crime allegedly responsible for large drug imports in Australia. That was an unintended activity, but as you can see, it did have consequences for the results. So in relation to wastewater analysis, for our national program, we're reliant on auto samplers, which are reliant on access to electricity, but we also have the ability to use passive samplers, which mean that we don't have to have access to an electricity source. This new sampling technology can be deployed in remote areas and away from treatment facilities, which allows us to focus on communities not currently covered by the national program. While the program can be operationalised in capital city areas, focusing on regional areas provides great insights because per capita drug use is often greater in these locations for many of the drugs monitored by our program. Law enforcement and health resources are more thinly spread in these locations, so new insights and opportunities are possible for these local commands. And wastewater analysis in regional cities and towns often covers the majority of the local population, and it can be conducted on a regular basis. So this often permits us to collect in regional and remote areas where there is often limited to no alternative data. So in addition to the National Wastewater Drug Monitoring Program, wastewater analysis has generated unique insights and can be used to measure the effectiveness of responses as demonstrated by the following examples. The first of which has been the ability to detect viruses such as COVID in commercial aircraft and cruise ships in order to assess the presence of infected travellers, which has enabled the prioritisation of vessels for treatment. The second was the monitoring of the impact on scheduling of codeine consumption. We've also had the impact of how regulation of oxycodone in Australia has had a statistically significant impact on reducing consumption. We've also got an example of how Australia is leading the world in detecting nitazines and xylazine in wastewater, two very harmful drugs that are causing concern both domestically and internationally. And finally, an example of how policy changes on alcohol availability in a specific location has impacted consumption. So the National Wastewater Drug Monitoring Program has never been about collecting data just for data's sake. It can assist in identifying areas for operational activity, monitoring the effectiveness of law enforcement, health and other responses, and monitoring the impacts on markets, including during catastrophic events such as COVID, large-scale impacts, including rescheduling. We are now routinely merging data sets to develop more granular understanding of drug markets. What we do know from the program is that differences exist within and between drug markets and across time, and this holds true even during catastrophic events. We know that holistic problems require holistic solutions, and that no single data set has all the answers, and that it's through layering multiple data and intelligence which will improve our understanding and generate new insights, allowing for informed and more effective collective responses to drug markets and their harms. So wastewater now is part of every major drug policy conversation. We now routinely merge data sets in developing our analysis of drug markets and to assess the effectiveness of responses. We layer multiple data and intelligence to improve our understanding and generate new insights, and it allows for more informed and effective collective responses to drug markets and their harms. And it's the frequency and scale of the wastewater analysis that makes it ideal to inform policy and operational decision making. So where to from here? The potential for wastewater is enormous. It's not limited by experience or imagination, rather by resourcing and the sheer number of alternative applications. Thank you.